I just want to thank CIRA so much for doing this for me. And I particularly want to thank Daphne Terrace, who got the idea, did the interviewing, and got everything in motion.
And Shirley, you said exactly what I wanted to say. There are two heroes in this story. One is Shirley Goldenberg, and I don't know whether you know it, but she is Shirley Goldenberg. And the second is Daphne Terrace, who took this on with her center and did the montage, did the interviews, did the editing, everything. And it's a fantastic initiative. And 25 years after receiving the Gérard Dion Award, here we are. How do we imagine the difficulties and obstacles that pioneers like Shirley had to overcome? And in particular, you can imagine the life trajectory of women pioneers, not because you are just a woman pioneer, but because you were a pioneer and you had to deal with the multiple dimensions of that.
My name is David Dorius. I'm a labor law professor now. And I don't really have a question. It's more about a comment about legacy. I've been hired in the last few years to do a bunch of expert reports in charter cases challenging the exclusion of different professionals, mostly lawyers, who are still excluded from a lot of labor relations legislation. I just want to say that the beginning of that research, the start of that story, is your work from the 1960s. Right, so you go back in and you're now building up a story for the courts of the whole history of how we treated professionals in the history of Canadian labor relations. And the first thing you find is your work. And so I'm now citing you 60 years, 50 years later, because the arguments you made are still the same arguments we're making today. It's just this, we haven't reached the point. We've reached it a lot with professionals, but not all professionals, right? And so you go back to first principles. Why are these people not covered by collective bargaining legislation? And we go back to your old work, and these are workers, right? This simple concept, these are workers, they should be covered by the legislation, is a straightforward concept to a labor relations person, but we're still not there. So I just wanted to tell you that even today we're reading your work and it's still influential.
Thank you so much.
Hi, Shirley. My name is Matthew Gordon. I'm a lawyer here in Toronto. All the developments you've seen over these many decades, I think early on in our careers, we all have these predictions in mind where we think the tides are turning, where we think things are going. Way back, maybe 50, 60 years ago, however long ago, what was one labor relations prediction you had that came right and one that came up wrong? And how did you react when you found out you were right? And how did you find out when you found out you were wrong?
It's a balance of power, and it isn't always exactly the same way. I think labor has gone a great deal since those days. I found one of the things was that with professionals, for example, the problems were different. The contract terms were different. Professionals, for example, engineers working in a large organization were asking that their names be put to their work rather than Hydro somebody or other had produced this work. So the issues are different, but the issues are still there. I didn't make predictions. I don't think it'll ever be perfect. It's a balance of power.
Something that I've noticed that might have changed in your era and around your dining table, where you found people like the later Judge Kaufman, Frank Scott, many legendary names of progressive thinking and progressive activity in Canada. The labor neutrals were not neutral. They weren't afraid to say, this is where we need to go. These are the values that we need to embrace. It seemed like a more exciting time in that sense because they were pushing the boat forward. Am I wrong in thinking this? That
It was a very exciting time, and I don't really know this time. So, Gregor, would you say that things are different, or that there was more progress then, and there is still progress to be made, or what?
I would say, and we'll hear from Daphne or anyone else, that there is a context in which the so-called neutrals who are deemed to play a role are more politically timid and less inclined to say what they think. And why that is, that's my inclination, so that governments used to say, we need to move forward on collective bargaining, we need to do this. Now they'll say, well, we'll see what the parties decide. In other words, there's less of a political impetus than in the period that I think characterized your most active years at this time, but I could be wrong.
Well, they were certainly very active years, and they were very progressive years.
Brian Langille, another legendary name in our field, at one point in a conference said, well, you have to understand, Daphne, it's the system we have. And I get the sense, Shirley, that you and a number of others were architects of the system. And now people are passive takers of the system. And when they're doing labor law reform, they're doing a little piece of it. We'll open the labor code, but we won't do anything significant. We'll tinker at the edges because we just accept that we have a system. And I see people like you, Shirley, and others of your generation having, and H.G. Woods certainly, having really wrestled with what kind of system we want. And I don't see that today. I see cowardice today.
I really want to acknowledge the fact that Shirley has an immense network of devoted friends, and quite a number are here today.
And I'm very happy to see them.
Hi, my name is Anna. I'm a PhD student here at the Center for Industrial Relations and Human Resources. I just want to hear about your experience doing research and then making things together as an academic with people that work. How was that process?
I tried to keep my students in touch with the real world. And I learned things from my students as to what was happening. For example, one student came to me and he said, I suppose you're going to tell me there's nothing to this, but I would like to talk about collective bargaining in sports. And I'm not a great follower of sports anyway, but then all of a sudden I hear that baseball players are going on strike or something. So, and I had no idea that the thing was moving to other parts of the world, other parts of the economy. My students were very enthusiastic. I don't know about the kids today, except, as was mentioned before, when I hear about the kids who are getting the annual scholarship in my name, they are fantastic. So I hope that will move on. I was very impressed, Gregor, very moved when I turned 100, that winners of the scholarship gave donations to the scholarship in my name, because they showed that they had gratitude for having won themselves, and they showed themselves to be real people.
And I think you call it paying forward, in the sense that people have a sense that they've been supported by a community of which
Right.
Shirley, and it's now their time to contribute. Rafael Gomez.
Yes, hi. So I'm filling very big shoes. I'm currently the director of the Center for Industrial Relations at U of T, that John Crispo, that you mentioned, started, and who Morley Gunderson behind me was a former director. So I'm asking this question not to put you on the spot, but your younger colleagues, Daphne and Gregor, to push back a little bit on what Daphne said, that the timidity of the current generation and so on. Well, you can be creators and innovators when you're starting de novo, right? Ex nihilo. There was no industrial relations system 60, 70, 80 years ago. But having been created, I'm a little bit more sympathetic to Brian Langille's statement. I wouldn't have been as a student. What do they say about your head and heart when you're 20 and you're 40? There's precedent. There's rules. There's like a common law embeddedness in institutions that develop in countries like Canada. So I think respecting the past, because it's the past now, is part of why it's difficult to make radical changes, because precedent matters, because in countries that don't follow precedent, they rule by decree. We don't want to kind of move to that sort of system. Daphne made the point that today, and Gregor too, neutrals and people in public policy don't think very creatively. They don't think the way you and your generation thought, perhaps. And my point was, it was your work that created an embedded system, a system that now, over 60 years, has created decisions, be they arbitrated decisions, judicial decisions, that we have to respect. And so we're kind of constrained by those past decisions in ways that maybe your generation wasn't, because you were creating it. So that was my pushback, as Daphne said, and Gregor too, that today we're not thinking in the same way we did in the 1960s or 1950s.
One of the reasons for wanting to capture Shirley's energy and Shirley's time was to inspire the same kind of willingness to create institutions, to be mentored, to reach out, to do new things. And there are absolutely, Raphael, there are pockets of tremendous innovation. But what I see in a lot of the research is, and Shirley talked about it, replication studies, very narrow things. A lot of us are, myself included, sometimes very introverted as scholars. We're not doing the kinds of work that I know that you and your colleagues are at the center, reaching out, having an impact on democracy and so on. That's pretty rare. What you're doing, what Wendy Sukier is doing, what others are doing to, it's almost like there's been a hiving in our profession. Those who are striving for the A and A+ journals, who say, don't leave your office, versus those that are trying to have a difference. And I guess where I'm honoring Shirley is in wanting to make a difference and surrounding herself with people who were pioneers.
I'm optimistic about what's going on with the new generation. I find the young people that I meet, and of course the top's the only one I meet are the ones who won the scholarship. I guess it sounds very important, and I guess it was, that we were building from scratch. But there must be a lot of new problems and a lot of people who are addressing themselves. I think the future is good for the field, from the young people I've met.
Shirley, my hero. When Carl visited Jamaica, he was the great hero of the unions and the sugar workers in the report he did in the Caribbean, treatment of Caribbean sugarcane workers. I wondered to what extent the experience of seeing the conditions in Jamaica in those sugarcane fields, what effect do you think it had on, if any, on your career?
But my experience being there with him in Jamaica was one of the most moving experiences in my life. I keep asking Jamaicans, are things better now? Was Carl's report implemented? And I think it was, because of the government to whom he made that report. And when I hear people say that Carl's, or how shall I put it, I have never seen conditions like the conditions the sugarcane cutters worked under. I saw a new world, and I saw absentee ownership, just not caring about the people who were working for them. There were little changes made, for example, labor conditions and the atmosphere and the strikes were such a problem in Jamaica that Rachel Manley's father, Michael Manley, who was really head of one of the unions, I think he was called Island Supervisor, said to his father, Rachel's grandfather, we've got to get a credible outsider in to see what's going on here, and it turned out to be my husband. And I'm told that his recommendations were implemented to a very significant extent, both on salary, where the workers were being cheated completely, and on working conditions. So it made a tremendous impact on me and on my husband. And I hear today still people saying that that commission was important. It's nice to feel that you did something really worthwhile. And then I made friends like Rachel through it, so that was very fortunate too.
Over to you, Evelyn, a comment, a question.
Yes, thank you. First of all, thank you so much. And on behalf of younger women working on labor relations, thank you for opening up these doors. And second, I bet you're always asked about the difficulties you face, but I wondered if you would like to share the greatest accomplishment, the one you're most proud of in your whole incredible career with us today.
I think the thing that was most important to me, apart from the research and so on, that I had to do as a matter of interest, and also to rise through the ranks to the full professorship, what was most important to me was my students. I got the greatest pleasure when any student continued in their work life in the field in which I and others had taught them. I got an even greater thrill when a student went further than I had in the field in which I taught him or her. And I think my greatest accomplishment may have been in inspiring some kids.
Now, it's my role here to thank Daphne, who has done such a fantastic job. We wouldn't be here and have this pleasure without what she did, and it's Daphne's role to thank Shirley and anyone else in her production team.
Well, production team, I first of all want to thank Tamar Becker. If you could stand up, Tamar. Tamar has been leading the Center for Labor Management Relations. Brian over there, Brian, could you stand up? You were in my office filming Shirley. But I've just captured Shirley to honor the field that we're in, right? It's Shirley, but it's Shirley who helped found the field we're in, and I think we should all be very, very proud of the field. And I want to draw attention to the fact that we have very deep roots. We have had very strong impact. We know where we came from. We know who our greats are. And I don't want us to forget the greats of our field. What does Google Scholar say? Stand on the shoulders of giants. So all of us as scholars, as academics, as practitioners, there's not a single one of us that is not standing on the shoulders of giants. And this tiny little woman beside me is a giant that we stand on her shoulders. So I thank you, Shirley.
And I thank you, Daphne, and I thank you, CIRA. And I've never had an experience like this before, and thank you so much.